So Rishi, I think we should start at 5 o'clock is already. Rishi,
Yeah. Thank you,
yeah, we
sir.
should start.
Yeah,
Let the student come. Yeah, so we should
they
start.
are committed. Yeah,
Yeah,
sir.
yeah.
So, firstly, good evening to all the participants. I welcome you to the webinar, and the webinar is related to the topic re-examining inequality. And I would like to welcome Mr. Sandeep and Mr. Dipanshu, uh, who will be heading this webinar today. So, Professor Dipanshu Mohan is an associate professor of economics and director and Center for New Economic Studies at Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, OP Jindal Global Institution of Eminence, deemed to be university. He has been a visiting professor to the Department of Economics at Carleton University, Ottawa, Canada, where he teaches courses in comparative economic history and development economics over the summer term. He was previously associated with the Jindal School of International Affairs from January 2013 to July 2020. Mr. Dipanshu completed his BA in economics from Ferguson College, Pune, and then pursued an MSc in economics history from the London School of Economics. His research work interests areas of law and economics, political economy, and development economics. During his academic tenure, he has been a visiting fellow to research organizations and universities across Brazil, Colombia, Australia, Cambodia. His work has been published in journals like Asian Ethnicity, Routledge, Cities Asian Journal of Social Sciences, Asian Journal of Public Affairs, Oxford University Press, Springer Nature, and he is a regular contributor for Mint and The Wire, Deccan Herald, Fortune India, The Print, The Hindu, India's Today's Meal Today, and East Asia Forum. So that's all about Mr. Dipanshu. And now we shall begin with the webinar. So I would like to give the stage over to Mr. Dipanshu, sir.
Thank you, Rishi, and a very good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to interact with students of Delhi University. I have been used to doing that more in person and getting a chance to physically interact and then meet. I used to, in fact, look forward to not only come to one of the colleges in DU for the interaction, but the post the interaction, the time that I could spare and I could spend with students learning about their own stories, their own interests, pathways to further interest and what they want to do. I think it can't be substituted in the format and platform that we're using, but such are the times that I think the pandemic has redefined and reoriented the way we look at interaction and communication. I can do that now, 3 hours away from Delhi, closer to Sonipat, without coming down and interacting with you guys. So while I tremendously miss being there and seeing you and interacting with each one of you, I hope I can do that soon. But nevertheless, I mean, we have to make the best of what we can. And I would like to thank Sandeep ji, Shalini at OP Jindal Global University, Rishi, Jaskirat, and others who have put in the work to organize this. I want to start by talking a little bit about why the topic. As most of you would know, since the beginning of the pandemic, which is back in February 2020. I mean, the pandemic kind of started a month or two before, but the response to the pandemic really started getting high from governments taking it seriously across the world from early March onwards and late February and early March onwards. One of the main conversation points that was there was that countries across the world had different state capacity and medical and healthcare systems to be able to deal with the virus, and there was a high amount of uncertainty of what the virus is, how to cure it, how to respond to it. Should we do a lockdown, or if you do a lockdown, how to do it, how to manage, and the major question which was there was largely for developing or countries and emerging market economies. which have largely a huge amount of unorganized, informal workforce. How will they, manage with maintaining social distancing? What would happen to these economies? Will they get poorer? So there are a number of these considerations, and economists were, like other policy makers and global public health experts, were quite, intrigued to see what may happen. And the most what you can do in such situations is go back into the past and look back into the past on how similar shocks, like the Spanish flu and others, which had, a pandemic in sight, how did they impact different countries in different ways? Of course, that's 100 years back, but you still have some literature to go back to, and some pointers to look. So I wanted to help us kind of go back to this subject, whether global economic inequality in any way has widened between countries, what has really happened to it. And there's one or two very interesting studies that have come out. One which I will be discussing today is a study by the Nobel laureate Angus Deaton, who got a Nobel Prize a few years ago for his work on health economics. And he makes some interesting observations. Now, what I want to do with this presentation is to take the next 35 minutes or so, and then we can open it up for a conversation for the time that we have, to talk a little bit about what we find, what we see, and what are some of the issues that are involved in the examination, measuring of inequality by itself. And this is where I tend to critique a little bit of what Angus Deaton has done in his study, and I'm seeing him in his work as a representation of the general mistake a lot of economists working on inequality are making, particularly when you're trying to look at global inequality and not inequality within countries. So I'll come to some of those things, and the idea of, in bracket, having re-examination added to the title was because when you examine inequality, and it's a subject which has gathered so much of attention amongst economists for the last 5 decades or so, there is always a lot of evolution that's going on in the study and the literature, and it's important to see what and how those things are important. You also see a poster in front of you, which is from a series that we did as part of the center at OP Jindal Global University. It's called the Center for New Economic Studies, where we did for a year a study on different groups working within the unorganized sector, how they were impacted by the pandemic. And I'll talk briefly a little bit about this as we come towards the conclusion, because the stories that come out are far more important beyond the data that tends to provide a more bird's eye view. It's like you're taking an aeroplane and kind of circling around and getting an idea of what you see from the top. But when you come on the ground and you start really interacting and talking to people, you see, oh, the situation is actually very different. So let me start by talking about where the intuition for this came in from. I initially, back in March, wrote a piece talking about how the pandemic, and this was for a column for Fortune magazine, which has its edition in India, on how the COVID-19 shock could be seen to become what was, quote unquote, the great leveler in terms of inequality. It's a term which an economic historian by the name of Walter Scheidel uses in a book in 2018, where he studied the economic history of all crises and how the crises over a period of time make global economic inequalities to go down, as against the conventional wisdom that you expect that divides between people is going to go up. But what happens at the global level is a scenario which one wants to look at. So the reason for calling it the great leveler was because when growth weakens and incomes fall, you expect those who are in the richer countries, particularly, I'm not talking about the billionaires, but I'm talking about those in the higher rich class, their incomes not to rise at the same level which it was rising before. And as a result, what you see, your difference in inequality, that is, if you measure it just by income, doesn't tend to be as big as it was, let's say, a few years ago. And this is something which, I mean, again, as I said, Walter Scheidel has done a whole historical analysis of all the crisis shocks. And I mean, of course, while writing the book he wrote in 2018, he would have had limited understanding that 2 years down the line, you'll have one of the worst crises ever seen since the Great Depression of the late 1920s in terms of its economic effect. So the intuition around the piece I wrote then was that global income inequality, which is the way economists generally measure inequality in terms of income and quantifiable indicators, may sharply fall between countries as growth, that is economic growth in richer nations fall. And one of the reasons growth may fall, and just to kind of give you a very simple notion of what and why it may fall, is that growth generally is measured in terms of, a function of a number of things. We generally, in an oversimplified manner, use this formula of output is equal to consumption, investment, government expenditure, total exports that you have. This is a very simple way in which we understand. So if you're consuming a lot, your investments are high, government is spending a lot, it's all driving and boosting demand. A lot of production is happening, consumption is good, you're exporting a lot of your goods. Oh, it's great. So all of that should kickstart and keep your growth levels high. Now, as you know, the pandemic, the lockdown, response to the pandemic, the fear amongst people to go out. Many economies like India, which is largely service sector-led economies, they're not manufacturing powerhouses like you see with South Korea or Japan or Taiwan in that sense. So you had the situation that not only investment went down, consumption also started lowering. People weren't sure they would have their jobs. So they weren't spending that much. Incomes weren't going that high. Many people lost their jobs as a result of the lockdown. India has over 85% of its entire workforce in the unorganized sector. So everything from street markets to everything were shut down. We don't export that much. So growth really came down. And the idea was that as a result of the richer countries not being able to grow as well, this may reduce the income gap over a period of time, which doesn't mean it's a good thing. I'm not no value judgments here that what's good or bad, but just on what may happen to global income inequality. But what may happen to inequalities within countries is that they may go up. So the intuition was between countries, you may see that the gaps may slow down a little bit. Let's say between Switzerland and India, if the Swiss economy, or I mean, another example could be Sweden and another country like UK, because the impact of the pandemic was such that most of these countries were affected. So what may happen between them is that income inequality may go down, intuitively speaking, and within the countries, particularly in emerging market economies or developing countries like India, China, Brazil, South Africa, Nigeria, just to give some of these examples, it may go up. And that may happen primarily because of the nature of these economies and how their markets are, how the workforce is. And as a result of inequality rising or income inequalities rising within countries, you'll see other kinds of social economic inequalities, the divide between rural urban areas. We know all this, how badly the seasonal migrant workers of low income groups who worked in construction and other areas had to kind of go back to their rural spaces and didn't have a job for months. Even right now, much of the workers have not come back to do the same thing that they were doing pre-lockdown. A wide digital gov. Not everyone has, like you and me, the privilege to talk and connect over a laptop and the technological medium of having a broadband internet to do that, right? So many people went out of the education net as well. Particularly, the impact was far worse in rural areas, amongst girls particularly. And we're seeing all of that as part of some initial data that's coming out. Nutritional access became a problem. As you know, in rural schooling, a lot of the nutritional supplies through midday meals, all of that was affected. Gender inequality, of course, you expect that to high. We know that India has one of the lowest female to male labor force participation rate, and all of that was before the pandemic, and other forms of inequalities based on caste, class, race, ethnicity. I mean, race, particularly a big issue in the United States. A lot of these were, factors which will exacerbate. This was the intuition, and economists like Joseph Stiglitz and others make statements about it. Most of us were of the view that this is going to happen. I think this is something which one had an idea. Um, the way of measuring inequality in any study is by looking at different concepts. And just for for the purpose of introducing how you measure income inequality, because as a student of economics or as a student of social science, you want to know how you measure before you look at whether your intuition is right or wrong. So you have to test your, what you would call as in a scientific exercise, your hypothesis by saying, okay, what concept of income inequality are we talking about? So in the literature that you have, there are three concepts that are popularly in the mainstream. As I said, the first thing you need to know is most of the discussion around inequality, economic inequality, that is, amongst economists is based still, despite all the development that has happened in the discipline of economics and development economics particularly, from the contributions of people like Amartya Sen, Mehboob ul-Haq, others, still the focus on income inequality and income measurement as a way of understanding inequality is still predominantly high. It's also one of the easiest ways of measuring because you have data available for countries on GDP, average income distribution in form of what you call as per capita income, which I hope most of you would know. Per capita income is the average distribution of income. But all of this is they all give you a very superficial idea on what is happening. You don't really get what you would call as a meso level or a worm's eye view of what's happening really at the ground level between people or within households in terms of income distribution. So the three concepts, I think I just want to quickly introduce this. Consider concept one considers dispersion of per capita income, that is distribution of per capita income between countries. Now, one of the assumptions here is you take one country as one unit of observation, and here each country is treated as an individual. So you take, Macau, Hong Kong, Singapore, each of them as, let's say as an individual, almost see them as an individual person. And calculations are done for measuring income inequality between these individuals. So just see, I mean, you're giving a person name like Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and you're saying, okay, how much are each of these individuals doing in terms of income distribution, largely in terms of per capita income that you calculate, GDP per capita. So total gross output that is being produced and, how that income is being put out. This concept of concept one, which is kind of the oldest way of traditionally measuring income inequality, does not take into account the population of a country. And that's an important point. I'll come to why I'm saying that. So India is the same as, Switzerland, or Switzerland is the same as Macau for that matter. It doesn't matter, right, what your population is. And I mean, it's an important consideration. Concept two, however, considers the distribution of per capita incomes between countries the same, but where each country's population is adjusted for. So just to very simply put it, concept two is like an evolution, it's an upgrade of concept one. It still takes a country to be as an individual. It still measures what you would consider as income distribution between countries, how it is in Hong Kong, how it is in Singapore, how it is in South Korea. It's just the same thing, but the difference here is you take into account that the population of a country is considered. So we attach what you would call in a very basic statistical exercise certain weights, that is preferential importance given to certain countries. And it's important, right? Because India and China have more than half of the world's population. So how the virus is affecting these two countries and these two populations will hold a key important point on how global income inequality fares, right? So if China did well to have positive growth level at the end of the year, and India did not do that well, which is what Deaton argues, that has an effect on global income inequality levels. So concept two is that it just pretends that each person in the world has their country's per capita income. It assumes that I'm earning the per capita income, you are earning the same per capita income if you're part of the workforce. That's an assumption. Well, and we can discuss whether the quality of the assumption is right or wrong, but you always work in a model with certain assumptions. Concept 3 is perhaps the only concept out of the 3 which talks a little bit about income distribution within countries. So here we want to know how a person within a country, let's say me, and another person who's teaching, let's say in Canada, how are our incomes being compared? So that once we compare those incomes, I can also understand how much am I spending on healthcare, how much he's spending on healthcare for the same treatment that is costing. This is the only measure which, as I said, is talking about income distribution within countries. What happens is, and that's what I wanted to come at, most studies focus on concept 1 and 2, not on 3. Very few make an effort actually to understand how income distribution is within countries. And that's something you would want to know, particularly for countries which are large in their population size. So India, you want to know, it's very different in Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, Kerala, West Bengal, how income distributions are. And there are distributional effects and inequities even within the states, right? West part of state, south part. So that's the way. Now, what we know, and just to briefly put this in context, the results from Deaton's paper, who's the Nobel laureate who just recently published a paper a few months ago, looked at 2 measures. He looked at mortality rates, which is how, countries were impacted based on deaths. If deaths were higher, of course, you expect growth levels to go down. So he looked at these 2 indicators as a way to look at global income inequality. So just to briefly summarize what results were there, he postulated and brought out through evidence that mortality rates, deaths from COVID, rose higher in economies with higher per capita incomes. That means the richer developed economies, despite better medical systems, saw higher deaths from the virus in relative comparison to less developed countries. And this is, adjusting for the fact that many developing countries were underreporting deaths. Of course, China must have had more deaths than what it is reported. Even you adjust for all of those things, it is true that richer countries with higher per capita incomes, starting from the United States to many other countries in Europe, saw a higher number of deaths as proportion to their population from COVID. Economic growth as a result of higher deaths in richer countries, point number 2, is something that fell down. So richer countries saw a poorer growth performance as compared to developing nations. And this is for year 2020, just for you to know. The third point is that as a result of this, there was a general point that economic growth generally may tend to fall for nations with higher per capita income from a shock. But the relationship effect of this depends on your population adjustment. So how you pick the data, that's basically the point I'm trying to make. If you pick the data in terms of taking nations just as counting everyone as equal, despite and irrespective of their population size, it's a different result you get. If you take into consideration the population levels in a country while taking the data, the result completely changes. And that's what you find. What you find is, and the point number C that says, you cannot, when you adjust for population, result coming from, comparing Macau and China, you can't do that at the same level. Macau is a small, rich country which has the population which is less than that of Delhi, right? So you can't compare Macau and India at the same level. Once you adjust for population, what you find and what Deaton find is that while you don't adjust for population, global income inequality reduced for year 2020. But once you take into account the difference in population sizes, global inequality widened between countries. Between countries, global economic inequality measurable through income widened as soon as you take population into effect. We can get later into a conversation on weight and what, but just to put a little bit of context around data that is used, just to give you a perspective of what this is. Generally what happens is the bubbles that you see here are largely in terms of the population size of a country. So you saw that the death in India were far more than what was reported to be in China. US, it was higher. And as you see with most countries, those in the richer categories saw higher deaths and lower growth. while countries like India and China were the swing states of sorts. Depending on how well India does, it can completely change the game on how income inequality shapes in 2021. Similarly, China allowed for that disqualifying effect for 2020 because it registered a higher level of growth, had relatively lesser deaths as compared to a lot of other countries. It was on a slightly better positioning. So that's one of the data points that Newton uses. In the paucity of time, I don't want to take a lot of time to go through the data, but all I wanted to show is that I'm talking about this from data that is available. Pre-pandemic, post-pandemic inequality, and one of the main measures that again economists use is something what you call as Gini coefficient. It's a very basic indicator, and what Gini coefficient really does is that it's just a way of comparing how distribution of income in a society compares with a similar society in which everyone earns exactly the same amount. So I'm earning the same amount, my family is earning the same, and the other is earning the same. How is inequality then shaping up between these societies? That's what this measure happens. So very simply, I mean, there are only two numbers here, 0 and 1. So if you're in the Gini scale, if you're closer to 0, that means you closer to a more equal position. If you're closer to 1, you are in a situation that there's high inequality. What you just simply see here is when you adjust for population, which is what as I said, you see the red line, which is not the dotted line. Dotted line was the pre-pandemic scenario that income inequality was falling. But post-pandemic, as soon as you adjust for population, income inequality started going up. You see a small uptick of that red line as it comes to 2020. That's the point that I was trying to make. Now, what are the issues with this result? And this is where I wanted to take the next 7 to 8 minutes before concluding to talk about what are the issues relating to this study. The study is a symbolic representation of where economics and economists, I won't say economics as a discipline, but economists measuring and working on inequality have failed to accommodate for multiplicity of factors which are important to study. I mean, this is an image from a study we have been doing on daily wage workers and how daily wage workers who come and search for jobs on a day-to-day basis in markets and mandis, labor mandis around the city, which are these unregulated markets where a person comes, looks out for work on a day-to-day basis. What happened to them? I mean, most of them are statistically missing or invisible as part of any of these studies. So there are methodological issues. I mean, Deaton acknowledges some of the issues, but he doesn't do as far as to kind of go and talk about how to resolve them. And there's some normative questions, and the normative questions are those which are far more philosophical. And there's been a huge discussion on how you measure and study inequality is dependent on how you perceive inequality to be. The one key factor is that even if I trust the result, and which is as robustly pointed out with the data, even if income inequalities between countries did increase, if you take population changes into effect, depending on how you pick the data, we still do not know from the study and from the results that come out from studies like these, how have inequalities exacerbated, that has increased within the country? How have inequality increased within the rural areas and urban areas, across gender, across class groups, especially, which is very important for, as I said, less developed countries, right? India, Brazil, Nigeria are all in that situation where we have a high informal space, and which makes you to ask where and how you look at this concept of inequality as well. Any normative discourse on inequality and its measurement from the perspective of incomes alone, just the fact on how much I'm earning, is not the most ideal way of understanding. Just because you get a higher income doesn't mean you are on a better footing in terms of society and well-being as compared to someone else. What you want to incorporate, and it's a term which is now used in the development literature far more, is a relational perspective, which is how in relation to someone else. If I'm How am I doing in my work as compared to a domestic worker who's coming and performing her duties in my home, right? How is her work different from, or how's she doing as compared to a gardener who's subcontractually working in a residential society? So relational perspective means within a given setup or a society, you're trying to compare from person to person how, in a very meso or localized perspective, how inequality is being studied. And this is a very important, there is so much now of work that is available, which helps and explain that in terms of measurement and even analytical scrutiny, there's more that you can do. And clearly, not much of effort is made in that regard. Most of the studies, like the one that I was citing the results from, study a macro income perspective on looking at inequality, and how you pick the data, results can totally diverge and change, as Deaton himself points out. How and where we look at the way forward, because given the time that we had, it's a conversation as part of the work we do as within the center, also the courses that most of us teach. We look at these as part of our modules in much more detail over weeks. But in trying to encapsulate it, the one key argument you wanted to make is whenever someone is talking to you about economic inequality, you don't want to look at it only from the perspective of income earning, something which may be important as it is. Yes, if you get a higher wage and higher income, it's important. But if you're living in a society where there is accessible or affordable healthcare, affordable education, or let's say you're getting it free of cost, it changes, right? If I have less income, even then I can get good education, good healthcare at a basic level, affordable housing. In most of these cases, then income just by itself is not a main criteria, right? We know how badly, and this is an image from our study on waste pickers closer to the Delhi NCR region, from a landfill site in Bhalswa. We know that the pandemic wreaked havoc in the lives and livelihoods of those who are living in poorer nations. Not just India. I mean, Brazil has been worst impacted as one of the other developing nations, with large unorganized and informal social and economic landscape. The study of informality, I mean, this is one of the bigger areas. Our center has been kind of devoted in trying to look at how informality intersects with other aspects of our studies. And it helps us when you get and understand how informal landscapes work. Informality is not a legal concept that you're working just outside the sector. I mean, a person who's selling vegetables on the street market, and someone who's selling, is a barber who's working under a tree, they're also doing a service and they're earning money for it. You can't say that they don't matter, right, in a society. You can make a way in which they do matter and their services can be better monetized for their own needs and well-being. A relational, that is person to person, a more intersubjective way of understanding inequities can help us get an idea of where accessibility is more differential. Who is getting better access to healthcare, education, economic opportunities. Most of you who are going to Delhi University coming from, I imagine, from different backgrounds, a very heterogeneous group, from different experiences of family, a lot of effort. And it's not fair to compare, let's say, one group with another. Jindal is a far more privileged section. And there has been a lot done to increase that heterogeneity, to allow students from different walks of life to come in. And that's one of the goals and visions of the diploma program, which have been recently launched with the School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, which wants students to work in a certain area of doing research, so that research is not considered as part of something that those do who are in the academically privileged sections and have the time and space to do research. You can do it if your own experiences in life and your study and scholarship make you interested. The other key point, and just to conclude the next couple of minutes, is it is about time, that we take factors around gender, class, caste, race, and ethnicity, each one of these aspects, as part of the measurement process. As soon as, in Dieter's paper, for example, as eloquent the data is and as well it is modeled, there's not even a single reference to gender inequality. Or the fact that it is something that one needs to be aware of while looking into a study of measuring of economic equality. We know for a fact that even in vaccinations, those belonging to the African American community are finding it very difficult to find access to vaccines. Affordability is a big concern. Logistical issues are there. So race is an important factor. Mortality deaths were far higher for minority communities in different parts of the world, and it's an important consideration because if the effect of inequality is to be measured, you have to look at what social structures are in place, and those have to be understood. So you want to look at this idea of examining inequality beyond an income-centered approach. That's the first thing where I feel economists like Deaton himself, given the fact, even though he very humbly, and which is unlike of most economists these days, which is in terms of trying to acknowledge some of the limitations of his study, makes certain important acknowledgements, but does not go as far as to talk about what are the other ways in which we can study this. With that, I'll bring this to a close and we can open it up for more questions. This is an image from a recent study we're doing right now in a very interesting migrant residential community in the border area of Gurgaon and Delhi. It's a place called Kapashera, and it's a fascinating find in terms of understanding how more than 80% of people from Bihar have migrated here, have been there for almost 10, 15 years. And it's a space which we're trying to understand, to talk to people and see how they have been affected over the last year and a half in terms of finding job, working opportunities, and have faced other challenges. Thank you again for the opportunity for bringing to be part of, and we can discuss a few questions about this and about the program that I just mentioned, about a one-year diploma program which allows you to look at some of these questions. The idea is to, from an interdisciplinary perspective, not look at in the perspective that only economists give you. The sociological dimension of studying inequality is as important, as I said, as looking at the perspective of income, which is usually missing the point on the other sides.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much for that lovely session, sir. So, Rishi, Jaskira, so can we have a questions? Yeah.
Yes, sir. We'll take up with questions now, sir. So, participants, those who want to ask, first of all, good evening, sir. Sorry, I joined the meeting late. I had an exam. Sir, so students, those who want to ask questions may raise their hands or may write in the chat box, and then we might unmute them.
Yeah.
So, sir, we'll wait for a minute and we'll go ahead with the doubts.
Sure.
Okay, sir, so we have one question here. Sir, so Sandhya asks, sir, that discourse is one advantage of income inequality, that it is easier to measure when one is trying to measure the informal economy. Sandhya, can you please write it again? We didn't get your question.
Yeah, well, I think I get where Sandhya is alluding. I know her
Yes.
for
Measure
some.
for
So,
informal economy. Greetings from
yeah, and I mean the concept of oh, we finally got a power back. Um, so this is the other way, right? Just because we have internet doesn't mean we have equal access. I didn't have power the entire day today, and I was just a little concerned whether just if the UPS pumps off, this is all gone. I can have the best technology, but you need power. Yeah, the conversation around informality is, I think, an important one. One of the important points, which I think Sandhya is working in that area in the UK, is the fact that once you bring people from multiple disciplinary spaces. I mean, the point around liberal arts curriculum, which we've been trying to encourage, is to, I mean, the JSLH, the school that we're with, has so many anthropologists and ethnographers that it just, I mean, the fact when you go to the field and talk to people when they share, you see how mixed and entwined these aspects are. The legal discourse has made discussions around formality, informality very dualistic. And the same way, I mean, economists have not even delved into that part. Very few in development spaces talk about it, but talking about it is one part, but doing something about it is an important consideration. So there are ways of measurement. I mean, measurement is I mean, we constructed, in fact, as part of our center work a few years ago, an index called the Social Equality Index, SEI, and it gave us an idea about how people within a state, we ranked states in terms of how states were doing in terms of access to education, basic education, access to clean drinking water, access to basic healthcare. And when we were talking about access as a way, we were talking about geographical access. That means how's the closest access for me in terms of going to a school if I want to get a basic education? Where is the closest school? So we looked at the performance of states in that, and it was so surprising that states which have lower incomes, in some cases, like Himachal Pradesh, Goa, which do not have the highest, per capita income of sorts, were doing tremendously well in these indicators. Not just Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and others, which are generally, championed as doing better on social opportunities, on housing, education, healthcare. You have to just talk to a person in a rural village from Bihar who migrates to Tamil Nadu, doesn't know the language, but just goes so that 3 months after spending time as a construction worker, he or she gets a domicile status in Tamil Nadu, can get access to a nutritious meal, can get access to, let's say, for his children, education in one of the public schools. Those are the things that people are looking for, right? A better future, even if they couldn't get one for themselves. I think those are considerations which are important as part of not just equity, but of development as well. Or as as part of our discussion on.
Yes, sir. Yes. So we have some more doubts. I will read them out, sir. Okay. So, sir. So Sandhya says very illuminating. Wage not the whole story. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sandhya. Hope you're well.
Chinmay, can you see students raising hand? I cannot see them on my screen.
No one is raising hands currently.
Okay. So, sir, so we have another question here from Atishay. So, sir, he asks, sir, first, he says, first of all, thank you for an amazing session. And, sir, he plans for the future to do MBA post his graduation. But, sir, now if he wants to pursue liberal arts, how will that course be inculcated in his plan?
Okay. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I just didn't get the name of the student.
Sir, this was Atishay, sir.
Abhishek.
Atishay, sir. Atishay.
Sorry. Hi, Atishay. Well, I mean, MBA is something which I've always said this to students in a lot of the conversations I used to have. It's something which you want to work towards as you have done a little bit of work in a given managerial space, and pursue it more as a specialization than as a first go to postgraduate field. I know Jindal itself offers MBA courses, but most people who've got a little bit of exposure of working, I mean, nowadays it isn't that hard most an undergraduate to do work for a year and a half with, a startup or a small and medium scale enterprise for a while to understand how a firm works and look at what aspect around the firm do you find interesting. Is it human resources? Is it strategy and management? Is it sales? Is it marketing? And once you identify what part you're leaning towards, you want to get involved. What liberal arts does, and as the reason why I picked a subject like inequality was, it's an academically nuanced subject which people want to look at, but it's so experiential in the lives of everyone that you can't have a conversation around this maybe just with one person to talk to. You want to talk to a sociologist, you want to talk to an economist, you want to talk to a political scientist, because a lot of people will say, oh, the answer to all inequality is the fact that the people are capably deprived, and they're deprived as a result of the social position they have and the political capital they don't enjoy. I mean, a lot of people see poverty as a situation of powerlessness, right? And as a result of that, what happens is that you find it difficult to get better opportunities, not for yourself, just also for others down the line. Your parents would tell you how they found it difficult to get access to a television set or a car, which may be far easier to get now, through better credit facilities. But you have to look at other factors as well. So what liberal arts, in the way in which, and I think this 1-year research program that has been, it's a fascinating opportunity for students. I don't say it because I'm from the same school, but I don't know of any program like this which gives you a 1-year opportunity for students to just do research. And that is research and develop better writing skills, because writing is so integral. How I communicate my point, let's say right now, I could have just shown you 3 charts or 4 charts, and on x-axis there's log value this, log value that. As soon as you would have seen that, students who just don't enjoy mathematics or don't like mathematics as a language of communication would have just dropped out from the session and say, you know what, I don't know what you're talking about. The moment I bring the story of a person and I start talking about this through an individual story of a given example or an illustration or through images, you see it's a different style. That is what we are trying to do, is to make communication more accessible, the sociology of knowledge more decentralized, right? And it's very important that as young students, those who are doing your undergraduate studies and you're in your final year, you just take 1 year of your time. And in that 1 year, all you need to do is to develop a research skill set which can help you go. I mean, research now is just it's not academic research per se. You go to a think tank, you have to do research. You go to a firm, a company, you are involved in doing projects. You go to a consultancy where most jobs are there for people in areas of commerce, business, legal consulting, things like that. You're required to do research and required to do right. And at no point of time, I'll be honest, and I'm no holds bar, whether it's Delhi University or other centrally public funded institutions, the focus on academic writing and research methodology is abysmal. That is, when I say abysmal, that is, it's pretty bad. What it means is when you come out, you find it, you may understand what the subject was, because you have a textbook, you read that textbook, you passed your exams, you did very well. Oh, great. But you come out to a company, you want to work, you find it extremely difficult because you haven't written a synopsis, you haven't written a small paper, you haven't written a research study. So what we are trying to this 1-year program, which is a diploma in research and innovation, is to give you that window and toolkit over a couple of semesters while doing an internship. There are a couple of students from the fellowship right now working with our center, and they're doing an excellent job with the kind of studies that I was talking about. And apart from that, also get a chance to write and work with one faculty member for 1 year. That's an opportunity you don't get. I mean, the last I know of is mostly Ivy League universities like Oxford and others allow you this tutoring facility of having a professor to work with one student on a study and a paper that you can get published. I think it's an opportunity that you want to get if you're interested in understanding the value of not just writing, but I feel communication, and in a field that you're interested in. You might be interested in sociology, political science, economics, doesn't matter. The liberal arts faculty team here, as you see their profiles, I was talking today about a concept in economics, for example. They're all of my colleagues, and I have to make sense because when I'm talking to them, I can't use the same language that economists are using amongst themselves just to kind of be more cool amongst themselves. That doesn't matter. I'm talking to an anthropologist. I'm talking to a philosopher. So I have to communicate, in a space and like that. So that's what the liberal arts team offers, in terms of exposure. So even if you want to do an MBA, I think you need that year to take a little bit of time to work on yourself, enable yourself to do better, think more critically, look at the evidence, and make. I'm challenging a Nobel laureate not because he's a Nobel laureate, but because the way he sees things in a particular study. I'm not making a generalization of value judgment. Oh, it's him and others. That's not the case. When you do critical analysis, you look at the text, you look at the evidence, and you talk about that. And we need it. At this time when rhetoric is triumphing over reason, you need to think reasonably. That's what we are trying to do.
Okay, sir. And sir, we have another question with us. Sir Harpreet asks, can you let us know that how, as the youth, we can do our bit to eradicate inequality?
Well, thank you, Harpreet. Maybe I think what I can do is take a couple of questions. I think इसमें 2-3 questions हैं. Just in the interest of time, there's one question by Shifali as well. If you allow me,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Shifali and
Shifali Gupta. Hi, Shifali. How does sociology as a subject help understand the human behavior in dealing with? Oh, Shifali, it's a question which I have over the last 3 to 4 years grappled with, because I didn't study sociology as a subject. I feel so sorry for myself. And the most of the work that I'm doing now is grappling with the area of what you may call as political sociology or economic sociology. These are fields, they're fields like this. I think it's important. So what sociology as a field does, it helps you understand concepts from the perspective of groups, how groups interact with each other, how group or social aggregates. When you're talking about a concept of class, class isn't something which is a part of a individual behavior, but as a part of a person belonging to a given class or a given caste or a race or ethnicity, over a period of time, as one grows old. The classic line of philosophers that all men and women are born equal. You're born equal, but as you are introduced to a society, as you get exposed as a child from the first 3 years onwards, your education system, what you see in society, it changes you as a person, right? And you start taking into consideration certain behavioral attributes. So from the perspective of doing this on looking at aggregates of groups, sociology helps us understanding that. The field which is actually doing a lot of work in this regard, where one of my colleagues actually who's a psychologist does this exceptional work, Maria, who's German, is in social psychology. The field of social psychology intersects this consideration of looking at human behavior and trends within it, and how behavioral attributes can be understood, and that helps you understand how people, how African Americans behave as part of being there in a certain group. Is it that you will say that all are the same? No, not really, but as part of a culture. And as a part of a given social system, you tend to respond to those situations in a certain manner. It says a lot about community and bonding as well. Many people, and the image you have in front of you of Kapashera, see exceptional stories of community building and spirit. The point that Harpreet asks, about what you can do is to engage and go meet and talk to people who you otherwise had no reason to speak to. What happens is, as part of our own privileges that we have, is that we like kind of using our mobile phones all day long, sit on a laptop, and our own view of reality is becoming more and more, as you know, more virtualized. We're making less and less effort to engage out with those who may be having access to some of these platforms, but we don't engage that much. And to combat inequality, particularly of access, you need to first understand what inequality is, right? And how it is playing out where you live. You might be living in a residential society where women domestic workers may be paid poorly, right? That's a case. Whether if someone who's doing the same amount of work otherwise in another country would be paid 5 times more than what is being paid, maybe at your own home. And I know it may lead to some conflicts with people within the household, but if you don't want to look at your home, start looking at your neighborhood. But one thing which is important, and again, as part of our liberal arts curriculum, focus on experiential learning, engagement on the field. I mean, students at an undergraduate level going to Anganwadis where there are women feeding in children on nutritious meals, to understand how that process works is important. It's not as if that you will end up working in the development sector and be looking for a job that, no, the idea is so that you expand your perception a little bit. You know what your privileges are. Once you know your privileges, you'll start working in the society towards doing things that you can. People are doing immense work. Young kids like yourself are doing tremendous work in areas of making more awareness on waste segregation, waste treatment. I mean, Delhi is kind of, I see it as, I mean, it's a classic case of how big an issue like waste is going to be. It already is, not just water, but waste segregation is going to be years down the line. Who is going to make anyone aware about this? It's you. How is it related to inequality? Well, you need to go and talk to people who are waste pickers. Are they coming from a certain sociological group? Where are they from? What are their stories? So if I share a link with you guys, and I think if you take the time, please do that. What we do as part of our center is to document video essays. And I'm just sharing the link here with you guys so that you can take a look at some of the video essays that talk about the stories of different groups who we have worked with over the last 1 year. ASHA workers, waste pickers, the daily wage workers, and you can get a little bit of an idea. I think there was one more question which I could see, which is of Mankaran. Does anybody want to just go through it?
Sir, I'll read it out, sir. The inequalities are prevailing in every section of the society, which has deprived people from basic necessities of life. However, provisions have been made to reduce these differences, but the lack of knowledge of these provisions is more prominent concern than the inequalities itself. Should we emphasize more on imparting knowledge and educate these lower income people about the provisions rather than talking about the inequalities?
You're right, Mankaran. I mean, this is an excellent point. I think there are both things with it. The first step of talking about making people aware is, I mean, it's like if I have to tell you what COVID is and what COVID is causing to people, how many deaths it's causing, I need to tell you what the virus is, right? I need to talk about the virus, how the virus, I mean, you guys would know, initially the discussion around the virus, oh, it's just like any other flu. When there's intense summer, it will go. When it is heat picks up, it will go. So flu to hota rehta hai, it will happen, nothing too problematic. India mein waisa nahi hoga, other countries. But it wasn't the case, right? Once you started looking at understanding what COVID is, and as one of the coronaviruses, it is different from what you would consider as a seasonal normal flu, and its symptoms are very different. You make yourself aware about of that problem. That is what I think we were trying to do here today. Now, then, once you know what the problem is, that inequality as a concept is just not about income distribution and how wide income distribution is. It's important to look at income distribution. It's also important to look at how within countries those inequities are playing out. and how you can measure and account for those. Once you do it, your perspective changes a little bit. The other thing is to then create provisions, and there's a lot of discussion on affirmative action. Why people of a certain race or a certain caste or a certain group, like a tribal community, should be given access to certain facilities, right? Like in education, in healthcare, and more should be done in that regard. Primarily for the reason because historically those groups have found it difficult to have equal opportunity. So you do more there. Of course, there's a huge debate around affirmative action and the way it plays out, and that's a policy debate and how you work on those. And I don't want to kind of get into that right now. But yes, you need to work on both awareness. Before awareness, you discuss what the kind of the problem. So the what question and what you're talking about. How is it a problem? That is on the how question. Who does it affect? Right? And who is worst affected by it? Right? Where and what can be done about it? Those are the questions that I think we want to look at from one stage to other, right? Like when you're playing a game, you're moving from one stage to the other as you're moving forward. That's the way you consider. I mean, that's how I would respond.
So, sir, I guess we are done with the questions.
Yeah. Okay, yes. Great. Thank you so much, guys, for the opportunity, and I hope I can get a chance to see and meet you guys in person. I think Sandeep ji, he facilitates us to get a chance. Maybe as we get into a later period of time, would be very nice. And thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, Jaskirat.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your presence, sir. It was a wonderful and knowledgeable session. We all enjoyed it, and it all added immensely to our knowledge. So thank you so much, sir. And thank you, Sandeep, sir, for organizing and facilitating this, sir.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Dipanshu sir, thank you so much. I would like to thank you, sir. Big thanks to you, Professor Dipanshu Mohan, for taking out the time from your busy schedule and offering an invaluable advice to the students today, sir. Thank you so much. I'm sure they have gained your suggestions and ideas also.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jaskiran. Thanks, Rishi.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Bye. Bye.